If I'm increasing frequency at the same volume, I'm essentially decreasing the intra-session fatigue that I'm accumulating and making the overall amount of work that I'm performing with near maximal force outputs increasing.
If you were to summarize it in 30-second elevator ride, what would that be?
I think the number one thing that this project as a whole has done for me is I view frequency and volume as separate levers. I think that's the biggest thing, is that there appears to be separate and potentially independent effects of frequency and volume for strength, but probably only primarily volume for hypertrophy. But the point is that they do seem to be separate levers to pull. And that ultimately influences practice quite a bit, right? If I'm a coach and I'm troubleshooting somebody's program and I understand that they do have separate effects and they're both levers that I can pull, that changes your management quite a bit. Whereas if you view that kind of the old narrative of frequency only impacts things so far as it influences volume, that's a different decision-making and troubleshooting kind of algorithm you're running as a coach. So I think the biggest thing this project has done to me is just that they are indeed separate levers, at least to me. That's kind of the way that I've viewed it.
I tend to agree. Even though, like we mentioned before, I don't think any powerlifting coach didn't think there was no effect of frequency, even before our meta-analysis came out, despite the evidence at large not showing a strong or consistent effect. I think in a lot of ways, this still has shifted me towards, okay, frequency is something I should think a little bit more about and should maybe prioritize more in the individualization process compared to set volume. Again, with kind of the caveat that we'll discuss volume a little bit more in depth in a future episode. So like you said, it's an independent lever. Why do you think it's an independent lever? This is an outcome-oriented analysis. We didn't look at mechanisms specifically, but from a high level or from a nitty-gritty level, does anything come to mind for you regarding why a higher frequency, all else held equal, would help?
For hypertrophy, this is extremely simplistic, extremely. There's two routes to getting the stimulus. You can turn I don't want to use the word intensity, but it's the word that's coming to mind. You can turn the intensity dial all the way up or the magnitude dial all the way up, or you can turn that intensity dial down and turn up the duration dial. Both of those seem to be reasonable approaches.
Duration being volume.
Volume, right? And
so I can use a squirt gun all day long, or I can use the power washer.
Exactly, yeah. There's multiple routes to accomplishing. If we take an assumption, again, I think it's an assumption, I'm not saying this is the way it works, but let's say there's some sort of sensor on the fiber level that's essentially measuring impulse on that fiber. It's how hard am I contracting and how long am I doing that? And that ultimately is related to the signaling and the growth of the fiber. That's extremely oversimplified, but it kind of helps me illustrate the point.
Yeah, and you can't actually use a water gun. You need to probably use at least a hose.
Yeah, exactly.
And the hose might wash the driveway if you do it long enough. But I don't think you're presenting those as independent things. No. You could use the power washer for 6 hours and get a really clean driveway.
The point I'm making there is that there are multiple routes to achieving the hypertrophy stimulus, and that's part A. Part B with strength is that I think that ultimately what you're trying to do is achieve maximal levels of force output. Is essentially what you're trying to do, and certain training variables allow you to do that more frequently, and other ones kind of take away from it. With frequency, if I'm increasing frequency at the same volume, I'm essentially decreasing the intra-session fatigue that I'm accumulating and making the overall amount of work that I'm performing with near maximal force outputs increasing. Put in non-scientific language, if you increase frequency at a given volume, your performance over that volume probably is going to improve, which in my brain, from a mechanistic perspective, is increasing kind of the average force output you're doing. And so that's that part of it. And then volume is influencing the amount of stimulus that you get, whatever local mechanisms are occurring for that strength level. But it also is kind of actively decreasing your ability to achieve peak force in the next session. So that's why they're different, is that with volume, there probably are some positive effects associated with that directly, but it also has a cost. And frequency, I think, is kind of a positive effect in a kind of unidirectional way, right? Like obviously there's an amount of volume performed at a high frequency that wouldn't allow you to achieve maximal force output in any one of those sessions, but at a fixed volume, frequency is always going to help.